Thank you for joining me today on the Raider Roots Podcast, episode 18. I'm your host, T3 Raider Facts, and today we're going to go back and revisit the story behind the play known as the Immaculate Reception. Like Oakland, the city of Pittsburgh is a proud blue-collar town steeped in sports tradition. In the main terminal of the Pittsburgh airport, there are two huge statues. One is of founding father and first president George Washington. The other is of Steeler running back Franco Harris, making the reception known throughout football lore and time as the Immaculate Reception. But how did we get here? To people who aren't from the area, it would cause them to pause and reflect, why are these two icons together like this? The father of our country and a guy who caught a pass off of someone else's shoulder pads during a playoff game. A play that didn't even result in a Super Bowl championship. Hell, one that didn't even result in a Super Bowl berth. This is the story of a play that has lived a life of its own. Not the game itself, simply the play. In this episode of the T3 Raider Roots Podcast, we'll look at the backdrop of this divisional playoff game, the events of the game that brought us up to a fourth down play, 22 seconds left in the game, the Pittsburgh Steelers in their own territory and out of timeouts, trailing by one, and needing an absolute miracle to happen in order to win its very first playoff game, and the cottage industry that has lasted nearly 50 years in its aftermath. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. Perhaps the night before the game in Pittsburgh, there were telltale signs that this would turn out to be a nightmare for the Raiders. Tight end Bob Moore, returning to the team hotel from dinner, was met by a rowdy group of Steeler fans and a police presence that prevented him from getting inside the hotel. When he identified himself to police but was still denied entry, Moore became surly and began to lace obscenities. His reward was a crack over the head by one of the police nightsticks. He was then thrown into a paddy wagon and hauled downtown to a hospital. Due to the brutality of the police, though Moore may have certainly contributed to that, he was ineffectual for the game the next day. It was an ugly introduction to a game that turned out to be equally tough. A true defensive struggle. The game was scoreless at halftime, and only 2 Pittsburgh field goals registered before the Raiders' final drive at the end of the fourth quarter. The Raiders' ground game was steady for portions of the game, but not spectacular. Quarterback Darryl LaMonica was moderately effective in passing, but a couple of costly interceptions resulted in his removal from the game, and Ken Stabler was inserted. In the fourth quarter, Stabler finally drove his team down the field, capped by a 30-yard touchdown run with just 1:13 left in the game. That, along with the extra point, seemed to seal the deal. One more defensive stand, and the Raiders would be making their way to another AFC Championship game, presumably against the undefeated Miami Dolphins, who would have their playoff game against Cleveland the next day. The loyal Pittsburgh fans stayed to the bitter end, hoping for some kind of miracle. When the Steelers got the ball one final time, Bradshaw tried to move his team into field goal range, but not much time remained. A short swing pass to Franco Harris moved the ball out near the Steeler 30. Then with the ball on their own 40, 3 incompletions resulted in a 4th down and 10, with no timeouts left. They were out of miracles. Or were they? After launching the fateful 4th down pass, Steeler quarterback Terry Bradshaw was lying on the cold AstroTurf field when he remembers hearing the roar of the crowd. And it was definitely our roar, he said. Bradshaw got up and started running down the field toward a mob in the far end zone, wondering, what just happened? Announcers said that the ball had been knocked away from Frenchie Fuqua and picked off by Franco before it landed on the ground, and he took it into the end zone with just 5 seconds showing on the clock. At approximately 3:29 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Franco Harris crossed the goal line on the receiving end of a pass that was never intended for him. He wasn't even in the area of the pass itself. For 15 full minutes, the head referee, Ed Swearingen, and his officiating crew deliberated over the play. Despite the fact that fans were pouring onto the field, players were huddled in mass confusion, and the announcers were trying to piece together what had happened, no official signal for a touchdown had been given, because nobody really knew what had just happened. Coach John Madden was going crazy on the sideline. Second-year linebacker Phil Villapiano, who was on the field during the famous play, thought the controversy was stemming on whether or not Franco had actually caught the ball. Villapiano indicated later that he felt like running up to his coach and saying, "No, coach, he actually caught the ball." Villapiano was unaware of the double hit rule, which translated that two players from the same offensive team could not consecutively touch the ball on a pass play. Such a touch would result in an immediate dead ball, and since this was a fourth down play, would have effectively rendered the game over. Villapiano was more concerned about something else that had occurred during the play, which we will discuss a little later. Rule 7, Section 5, Article 2, Item 1 states that, quote, "The first player to touch the pass, he only continues to be eligible for A." A meaning in this case the Pittsburgh Steelers. If Fuqua had been the only one to touch it before Franco, it would have instantly been ruled as an incomplete pass. As the players were gathered on the field, the announcers were telling their audiences, both on TV and radio, that there was no indication about whether or not the teams were to line up for an extra point, because the game was not over and there were still 5 seconds left on the clock. John Madden later indicated, "In the history of football, when a guy crosses the goal line, it's either a touchdown or it's not. They didn't call a touchdown. They didn't know if it was a touchdown." Madden went out to talk to the officials, and according to him, they said, "Get away. We don't know what happened." So now the referee leaves their huddle and he goes over to the dugout on the Pittsburgh Steelers side and he gets on the phone. And then he hangs up and he walks out to the middle of the field and signals touchdown. There's a preserved photo of Raider linebacker Dan Connors facing the referee when he made this call, with his head cocked in stunned bewilderment. The referee then told Madden that they didn't look at replays. When interviewed in the locker room right after the game, Madden had said, "That's a hell of a damn game that has to go down to someone up in the press box." Madden still wants to know who that official made a call to, because they won't ever admit it. "No one knows," he continued. "Of all the investigators and investigative reporters, no one knows who that guy talked to and what was said on that telephone call. That question has never been answered." The play had lasted just 17 seconds. Tens of thousands had witnessed it, and yet nobody actually saw it. The press started to try and piece it together, or at least piece together what had happened in the locker room after the game. They talked to Bradshaw, they talked to Franco Harris, and a couple of reporters were smart enough to go over and talk to Steeler running back John "Frenchie" Fuqua, the intended receiver on the play, according to teammate Andy Russell. And they came over to him and they said, "Well, can you explain what happened exactly?" And he said, "Well, the ball bounced off my chest. And I knew," said Russell, "that was not the right answer. Frenchie didn't know the rule. He was just talking, and he really didn't know what happened because he got hit in the head. And then," Russell said, "I grabbed him and said, 'No, Frenchie, what you meant to say was.'" Now, Raiders tight end Raymond Chester said that he talked to Fuqua after the game, and Frenchie said, "You know the ball hit me." And I said, "Yeah, I know it hit you." And he then said, "Yeah, it did hit me, but that's just the way it goes." 7 days later, the plot thickened when a new camera angle emerged during the nationally syndicated NFL Game of the Week. The end zone camera footage shot by Ernie Ernst, which showed Franco scooping the ball up after the deflection, spliced together with the television view from Jay Gerber from the 50-yard line of Bradshaw scrambling and throwing the pass. The tail end of Franco's dash to the end zone became an iconic film reel that would be viewed millions upon millions of times, even to this day. The Immaculate Reception became the Zapruder film of NFL football and sports conspiracy theorists, and has been analyzed and scrutinized in every possible way, shape, or form imaginable. The Zapruder film, of course, being the iconic home movie that was shot in Dealey Plaza at the time that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated back in 1963. Well, this was only 9 years after that, and the Immaculate Reception hadn't even gotten its name yet. The idea was to look for something incontrovertible that would prove that the play was not legitimate and that the Raiders were truly robbed of a victory. Perhaps the most famous play in all of professional football, but it needed a name. And it got one on that same Saturday night after the game in a local Pittsburgh tavern when Steeler fan Michael Ord stood up and, drawing on his Catholic upbringing and roots, said, "From this day forward, I would like us to refer to this day as the Feast of the Immaculate Reception." Ord's girlfriend called Myron Cope a local sportscaster, and he pronounced the catch immaculate that night on the 11 o'clock news. but it took a while to catch on. The team's highlight reel at the end of the year only referred to Franco's catch as a miracle and amazing, but it didn't gain traction right away. Sports reporters outside of the Pittsburgh area hadn't known what to call it. Now, the Rooney family, the owners of the Pittsburgh Steelers, were all about family, faith, and football, and they did not like the name the Immaculate Reception. They thought it sounded sacrilegious. Most of the media in Pittsburgh stayed away from it. It was referred to as the tipped pass or that deflected pass. A lot of people point back to this first Steelers Super Bowl 2 years later when before the game, one of the announcers said, "Remember the Immaculate Reception?" Once it was dubbed that on national television, it kind of took on a life of its own. Perhaps what made the name stand out was that it was truly unique in nature, and it turned out to be very marketable. Steelers running back Rocky Bleier commented on other plays, such as the catch, the famed reception that propelled the 49ers to their first Super Bowl later in the 80s. By comparison, it doesn't have the pizzazz, It's the Immaculate Reception. So it became, in the words of Frenchy Fuqua, a myth to some and a faith to others. At the Pittsburgh Sports Museum History Center, a full-size cast likeness of Franco scooping up the deflection is on display, along with an original piece of Three Rivers Stadium AstroTurf and Franco's shoes from that game, all a part of living and recorded history. Al Davis said, "Unfortunately, in our culture, there's only one thing that matters, is who wins. The winner writes the history book. The winner gets the Super Bowl trophy. The winner's the genius. You have to win. It's one of the great moments in National Football League history. It's not a great moment in Raider history." In Raider history, the play has become known as the Immaculate Deception. There were three things that happened during that play that leads to the conspiracy theory that there was a vendetta against the Raiders and that the game was handed to the Steelers. The first and most obvious was whether or not the ball bounced off of Frenchy Fuqua. If it had, the play would have been ruled dead due to an illegal double touch. Oakland would have taken over and run out the clock. The second, less obvious, was whether or not the tip of the ball actually hit the ground as Franco was scooping it up and running toward the goal line. None of the camera angles showed it, and Franco himself didn't really know. The third conspiracy theory involves the crowd. Once Franco made it into the end zone and he started to get piled on by his teammates and hometown onlookers on the sidelines, people started jumping out of the stands and joining in the wild celebration. It was a total mob scene, but there was never an actual touchdown signal made by any of the officials. There was a tough security issue on the field and a huge discussion by the referees in the end zone. Many people feel that there was genuine fear in the hearts of the officials as to what might happen if they changed their decision. One of the announcers had even said that the place would erupt into a literal riot if they were to disallow the touchdown. Raider safety George Atkinson remembers hearing one of the officials ask the question, "How much security do we have?" Raider linebacker Phil Villapiano, trailing on the play, was hit from behind by Steelers tight end John McMakin on the play. It perhaps was a clip, but wasn't called. This adds yet another layer to the conspiracy theory. But whatever the actual truth of all the little nuances of the play, one thing is for certain, at least in the words of Al Davis. "I thought we got taken. We should have had that football game, but we didn't get it. Fuqua knows he hit it, and it should have been our game." And so for the Raiders, 1972 closed out on a sour note. The game was a launching pad for the Steeler dynasty of the 70s, resulting in 4 Super Bowl victories. For the Raiders, it was a blip in their long string of success, and they would end up making it back to the AFC Championship on a regular basis throughout the decade. For fans, the Immaculate Reception is more than just a talking point. It's the great mystery that pulled two teams into one of the most heated rivalries in all of sports, and it would certainly be revisited over the next several seasons. For this episode, I would like to thank Mike Ciani and Christine Setting-Clark, Murray Olderman and Mark Rabowski, and NFL Films. I would also like to thank my producer, Heidi Stabber. You can catch me and Heidi together with Raider Homer on the Only Nation podcast as we cover the Raiders from every angle. As for this Raider Roots podcast, go to my YouTube channel, T3 Sports Guy, and subscribe. You can go back and catch all the episodes that will bring you up to speed on Raiders history. In our next episode, We'll take a look at the year 1973 as the Raiders try to overcome this bitter defeat at the conclusion of the 1972 season. This is T3 reminding you that passion always outlives fashion, and I want to wish you a bright silver moon shining in the dark black night. Take care, everybody, and go Raiders.